I'm Tyler Souters in Los Angeles. You're watching Clean Skies News. We are at Dodger Stadium today talking about clean energy vehicles, the electrification of the U.S. transportation fleet. Joining me now is the CEO of NRG, David Crane. And David, it's great to have you with us today.
Tyler, it's great to see you.
Fresh off a plane from Japan, I know. Talking about today's event, the introduction of the Nissan Leaf is the occasion. But this is a partnership. The electrification of the U.S. fleet requires a great deal of give and take with the private and public sectors as well.
Well, that's right. I think it requires a partnership within the private sector between companies like Nissan, the car maker, battery makers, and the electric sector like NRG. But then you're right, that also includes public and private partnership because, you know, public authorities, they control a lot of the aspects of the transportation infrastructure, so they need to be brought into the mix as well.
Let's talk about one of the broadest issues, David. That is the potential boost in generation or delivery that you may need with so many plug-ins happening overnight when we get to that stage.
Well, I think one of the great things about the electric car versus some of the other alternatives to gasoline is that the infrastructure is really there. You don't have to substitute for the 148,000 gasoline stations in the country because your fueling option is in your home. And so you start with that. Now people worry, of course, will we have enough power plants? But actually electric cars are so efficient relative to internal combustion engines that it would take a very, very large penetration of the electric car. Certainly in terms of the total number of power plants in the country, with 230 million cars, you could get past 100 million electric cars in the country before you had to add even one more power plant.
What about handling the loads? We hear typical load now. The problems generally are involving summer afternoons, air conditioners kicking on, late afternoon, early evening, people getting home from work. This is a different situation where if we get a smart grid implementation in, people can charge overnight, but then you still have a large load overnight.
Well, Tyler, let me say three things to that. First of all, I think that the electric car and the smart grid go together like chili and con carne. To me, actually, it's hard to justify the expenditure for a smart grid unless you have the electric car, because the smart grid will very much help feeding the electric car into the system. So
dishwashers and laundry machines alone won't do it.
I think that's important. But I would also say, in terms of exacerbating the peak electricity demand during the day, peak electricity demand during the day comes from like 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Most people believe that's not when people will be charging their car. They'll be charging their car at night when they've gone home, and when they in the office in the morning if it's a two-plug system. So the real issue, I think, with the electric car charging at home is that it'll cause local system instability if you had, say, 5 neighbors on the same transformer all trying to charge their electric car at home, because an electric car, when it starts charging, takes about the same amount of power as the whole house does. So the electric company, which may have been thinking that they were feeding 5 homes off that one transformer, would suddenly be feeding 10. But but with information flow, there are ways to deal with that, and it's an easily surmountable problem.
I think it's fair to say at NRG, David, you have a fairly diverse portfolio of generation for the most part. Do you find that there's more pressure for clean generation as the public becomes a little bit more associated and better read and understands better the issue of electrifying vehicles, that even if we have zero emission vehicles, that power generation may not be zero emission?
Well, fortunately, I think one of the things that our industry, I think, fortuitously benefits from is that the American public thinks that electricity is a relatively clean form of energy. And in fact, it is compared to tailpipe emissions. You know, even electricity generated from conventional coal plants fed into an electric car creates 25% less emissions than an internal combustion engine. But of course, we all want a much better environmental outcome than that, and there's no doubt that the electric industry right now is moving dramatically away from normal emitting forms towards low carbon forms. And that's the renewables, and it's also nuclear.
Doesn't that mean a big boost for nuclear in the U.S. potentially?
It does. I mean, nuclear. I mentioned that the smart grid and the electric car go together. Actually, the third leg of the stool is nuclear plants, because one thing that a lot of electric cars would do, 100 million electric car penetration, is it would bring up the off-peak demand for power. So there would be a need for more power plants eventually that ran 7 times 24. And also, as you say, you don't want to substitute smokestack emissions for tailpipe emissions, and nuclear has no smokestack emissions. So to me, it creates a virtuous green cycle that involves both the electricity sector and the transportation sector.
David, final question. If you could look into your crystal ball, when do you see the full implementation of an electrified transportation fleet here in the U.S. and NRG and the generation sources being ready for that?
Well, I would say that every extrapolation about market penetration for the electric car that I've seen in the United States, I think, is dramatically undershooting the mark. I think the official government forecast is 4% electric car penetration by 2030. I think if we create this public-private partnership and the leadership that companies like Nissan are showing is a huge step in that direction, I think we're talking maybe 40 or 50% market penetration in terms of new car sales by 2030.
All right, David Crane is CEO of NRG. A pleasure to have you with us today, David.
Tyler, it's great to be with you.
All right, thank you for being with us as well. In Los Angeles, I'm Tyler Suiters, and you're watching Clean Skies News.